Okay, wow, you weren't kidding about a deep dive, were you? This stack of Daniel Garcia Andújar interviews is, well, it's a lot.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Andújar is one of those artists who makes you think differently about, well, everything, really.
We're talking about the internet, art, power, all these big ideas, and how they kind of get all tangled up together, right?
Exactly. Andújar's work really gets under your skin and makes you question everything you thought you knew about, well, the internet, for starters. But it's also about how we experience art, how it's controlled, and how technology is changing all the rules.
So we're jumping into 4 interview transcripts and a whole YouTube video, all about Andújar's work.
We've got our work cut out for us.
Tell me about it. Andújar has been wrestling with these ideas since the early days of the internet, long before most of us even knew what a website was.
Right, like way back when dial-up was a thing. And that's actually a really important point because his early experiences with limited access to information really shaped his perspective.
He grew up in Spain, right?
Right.
What was that like for him?
Yeah, he talks about it in the Alicante interview. He had this real thirst for knowledge, but access to art and information was really restricted.
So he saw the early internet as this kind of digital utopia, like a way to break down those barriers.
Exactly. He saw it as this vast, open frontier, a space where anyone could access information and connect with others. It was a stark contrast to the controlled and censored environment he was used to. He talks about it in the NetTime interview, calling it this kind of Wild West, full of possibility.
Which is so different from how we experience the internet today.
Right. Like, we take it for granted now, but back then it really felt like anything was possible.
So how did that early internet idealism influence his work?
It's everywhere. He was fascinated by this idea of democratizing technology, empowering everyday people to become creators and disruptors.
And that's where the Technologies to the People project comes in, right?
Exactly. It's like this perfect example of his philosophy in action. He wanted to give people the tools to create their own narratives, to challenge the status quo.
He wasn't afraid to make a statement, that's for sure. I mean, that whole Evalencia project where he basically hijacked the official Art Biennale's website using early SEO tactics. Talk about a power move.
It was brilliant. Imagine searching for the Biennale online, and instead of their official website, you're redirected to Andújar's scathing critique of the event.
He basically used the system's own rules against itself.
Exactly. And it worked. People were talking about it, debating it, and that's what he wanted. He understood how to get people's attention, how to use the internet to spark a conversation.
He sounds almost like a digital activist as much as an artist.
I think that's a really accurate way to describe him. He was using art to challenge power structures, to expose hypocrisy, and to make people think critically about the world around them.
And he wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers along the way. And sometimes he took that quite literally, like burning down his own exhibition at Documenta 14. What was that about?
Oh man, that was a powerful statement. He had this whole exhibition exploring these ideas of ownership, authenticity, and the role of art in a world grappling with conflict and loss.
But to actually burn down his own art, that's pretty extreme, even for the art world.
It was intense, but it really got people talking. He was juxtaposing these classical sculptures alongside their 3D printed replicas, then destroying it all in this very deliberate act. It was a powerful metaphor for the digital age, where creation and destruction can happen in an instant.
It kind of makes you think about all the digital stuff we create and consume. Is it really permanent? Does it have any lasting value?
Exactly. He's forcing us to question what we value and why, especially as technology reshapes our relationship with art and history.
It's like he's saying that nothing is sacred, especially in a digital world. But it's not all doom and gloom with Andújar, is it? He also seems really playful and subversive in his work.
Totally. He's not afraid to have a little fun while he's making you think. But yeah, he's definitely not afraid to tackle some really complex and uncomfortable truths about the internet.
Like the whole idea that the internet, this space that promised so much freedom and connection, also has this much darker side.
Right. He's very critical of how it's become this tool for surveillance and control, where our data is collected and used against us without our knowledge or consent.
It's like that saying, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, but taken to a whole new level.
Totally. Andújar really gets to the heart of that. He talks about how the internet, which started with this utopian vision of democratizing information, has become this incredibly powerful tool for manipulation and control.
and that we're often completely oblivious to how it's happening.
Exactly. He sees it as this kind of invisible architecture, these algorithms and data systems that shape our online experiences in really subtle but powerful ways.
It's like we're living in this digital matrix, and he's trying to show us how deep the rabbit hole goes.
And he's not just pointing fingers at the big tech companies or anything. He's asking us to take responsibility for our role in the system.
Which can feel pretty overwhelming, to be honest. Like, what are we supposed to do about it?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I think that's what we're going to start unpacking as we dive deeper into his work. It's like he's saying, okay, wake up. We're handing over control of our lives, our thoughts, our very identities to these systems.
And the scary part is, we don't even realize it's happening half the time. It's like we're all just sleepwalking through this digital landscape.
And that's where his work becomes really powerful because he's trying to shake us out of that complacency. He wants us to see the invisible strings, the algorithms that are pulling us in different directions.
So it's about becoming aware of those strings, those algorithms, and then figuring out how to, cut them, rewrite them.
It's more about understanding how they work so we can at least navigate them more consciously. He's not saying we need to completely disconnect or go off the grid, although he certainly appreciates the irony of using digital tools to critique the digital world.
He's full of contradictions, isn't he?
It's part of what makes him so interesting. He's grappling with these really complex issues, and there are no easy answers. But one thing that comes up again and again in his work is this idea that the internet, despite all its flaws, still has the potential to be a force for good.
So he hasn't given up hope completely.
No, not at all. He's actually quite optimistic in some ways. He sees artists and activists as playing a crucial role in shaping the future of the internet.
Like, they can use their creativity to subvert these systems, to use them for good instead of evil.
Exactly. Remember that project he did where he created a website that looked exactly like the Spanish government's website?
Oh, yeah. He basically created a fake government website. What was that about?
He wanted to show how easy it is to manipulate information online, how easily we can be misled. And it worked. People were freaking out thinking it was the real deal.
That's hilarious, but also kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Exactly. It gets to the heart of this question of trust and authority in a digital age. Who do we believe? Who has the power to shape our reality?
It's like we're constantly questioning everything, which I guess is kind of the point, right?
Exactly. Andújar wants us to be more critical thinkers, to question everything we see and hear online. Because the truth is, reality is becoming more and more difficult to pin down in a digital world.
It's like we're all living in our own little filter bubbles, surrounded by information that confirms our existing biases.
And that's a really dangerous place to be because it makes it much easier for people to manipulate us. Andújar talks about how this can lead to a kind of digital amnesia, where we forget about history, about context, about the things that happened offline.
It's like we're living in this perpetual present where everything is fleeting and temporary.
Exactly. And he sees that as a real threat because it allows people in power to rewrite history, to control the narrative.
Which brings us back to that whole question of power, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Andújar's work is all about challenging power structures, whether they're political, economic, or technological.
And he's not just talking about governments and corporations, right?
No.
He's also critical of how technology can be used to reinforce existing social hierarchies.
Right. He talks about how the digital divide is creating a new class system, where those who have access to technology and information have a huge advantage over those who don't.
And that's not just about having the latest smartphone. It's about having the skills and knowledge to navigate the digital world, to critically evaluate information, and to make your voice heard.
Exactly. And that's something that Andújar is really passionate about, empowering people to take control of their digital lives.
He seems to have a knack for finding these really concrete examples to illustrate these big, abstract ideas.
He's a master of that. He's always drawing connections between technology, art, politics, history, all these different threads that might seem unrelated at first glance. But he weaves them together in this really compelling way that makes you think differently about the world.
Like that story he tells about the reconstructed Sarajevo Library, this beautiful building meticulously rebuilt after being destroyed in the war.
Oh, yeah, that one's heartbreaking. They rebuilt the physical structure, but the entire collection, all those irreplaceable books and documents were lost forever.
It's like this perfect metaphor for the digital age. where we're so focused on the hardware, on the devices, that we forget about the content, the information that gives them meaning.
And the people who create and consume that content, he's really concerned about how technology is shaping our relationship with knowledge, with history, with each other.
He even talks about the architect of that library who committed suicide on the eve of its reopening. Can you imagine the weight of that loss? To rebuild this beautiful symbol of knowledge, only to have it stand empty.
It's a powerful image, and I think it speaks to a lot of the anxieties we have about the digital age. We're surrounded by all this information, but are we really any wiser? Are we really connecting with each other in any meaningful way? Or are we just becoming more isolated, more fragmented?
These are big questions. I don't know if we have any answers yet, but I think Andújar's work at least gives us a framework for thinking about them, for starting to grapple with the complexities of the digital world.
And that's what makes him such an important artist for our time. He's not afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge our assumptions, to make us uncomfortable.
And maybe that's what we need right now, a little bit of discomfort to shake us out of our digital slumber.
Exactly. He's a wake-up call, urging us to be more critical, more engaged, and more intentional about how we navigate this digital world we've created.
It's a lot to take in, but it's also incredibly inspiring. Like, okay, maybe we can't fix everything, but we can at least try to be more aware, more responsible, and more hopeful about the future.
Exactly. He's not saying it's going to be easy, but he is saying that it's possible to create a better future, a more just and equitable digital world.
And that's a message I think we can all get behind. But how do we actually do that? How do we take these big ideas and turn them to action? So where do we even begin? It feels like we're up against these massive invisible forces.
It can definitely feel that way, but Andújar would say that the first step is simply becoming aware, like recognizing that these systems exist, that they're not neutral, and that they have a very real impact on our lives.
Okay, so awareness is key. But then what? How do we actually start to push back against these forces?
Well, he talks a lot about the importance of reclaiming our digital agency, like becoming more conscious and intentional about how we use technology.
So not just passively scrolling through social media or letting algorithms dictate what we watch and read.
Exactly. It's about making more deliberate choices, seeking out alternative perspectives, and questioning the information we're being fed.
It's like we have to become our own filter bubbles, in a way.
In a way, yeah. But it's also about connecting with others, building communities, and using technology to amplify marginalized voices.
It's about remembering that there's a whole world outside of our screens, and that real change happens offline as well as online.
Absolutely. Andújar talks about how important it is to engage with the physical world, to have real-life conversations, to build relationships with people who are different from us.
He's not advocating for a complete digital detox, is he?
No, not at all. He's not anti-technology by any means. In fact, he sees it as an incredibly powerful tool for creativity and connection. But he also sees how easily it can be used to divide us, to isolate us, and to reinforce existing power structures.
So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Exactly. And for Andújar, art is a way to navigate that balance, to explore those tensions, and to imagine new possibilities.
It's like art can be this kind of antidote to the digital overload, a
Mm.
way to slow down, to reflect, and to reconnect with our own humanity.
Exactly. And it can also be a powerful tool for social change, for challenging the status quo, and for creating a more just and equitable world.
It's inspiring to think about how art can play such a vital role in shaping the future.
Absolutely. And I think that's what Andújar's work ultimately reminds us, that we're not just passive consumers of technology, but that we have the power to shape it, to use it for good, and to create a future that reflects our values.
It's a powerful message, and one that I think we could all use a little more of these days.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the early days of the internet to the complexities of artificial intelligence, from the power of algorithms to the importance of human connection. And through it all, Andújar's work has been this constant thread, challenging us to think differently about the world around us.
He really makes you question everything, doesn't he? But in a good way.
Definitely in a good way. He's one of those artists who stays with you long after you've experienced his work.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling we'll be talking about him for years to come.
I think you're right about that. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive for today. A huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey. And remember, the conversation doesn't have to end here.
Exactly. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep creating.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.